All views and opinions expressed in this podcast may lead to learning. All information provided is for educational and developmental purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for a growth mindset. Before taking action, please consult your motivation.
This is the Teacher Talking Time Podcast.
What we are trying to do here at the level of the Basque Country is, you have to make teachers aware of how important corrective feedback is. I mean, normally, and again, I always say this, in teacher workshops and everything, I never blame teachers because at least in Spain, they're up to here with administrative work. They don't have time to read research articles or to interpret research articles. So it's our job as researchers to, organize workshops and organize fora in which we can share our findings, leaving aside all the jargon and just conveying the main ideas of what we do.
Teacher training about corrective feedback. What does that look like for you?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teacher Talking Time podcast, brought to you by Learn Your English. To those of you who are new listening to this podcast for the first time, the main aim of our podcast is to really deconstruct language teaching to bridge the gap between research and personal practice. Each episode is dedicated to our vision of education, continuous growth that is accessible, affordable, and appropriate to your context. Andrew, we also have a membership, don't we?
We absolutely do. Our Learn Your English Teacher Development Membership, where you can join a community of curious teachers and educators who want to achieve more without having to plan and teach more. Leo, you like to say, teach more mindfully, right?
That's right. And that's what we try to do with our membership. We try to provide content, mentoring, courses, and more importantly, a community of practice to help teachers plan less so they can actually have time to develop more. And what we focus on, Andrew, mindful and meaningful teaching, better thinking, continuous learning, developing a healthy mind, purposeful creativity, mental tools for thought, and humanistic education. Andrew, if somebody wants to become a member, what do they have to do?
Oh, so simple. Just go to courses.learnyourenglish.net and become a member right there. You'll have access to all of our materials, not only for this month, but for all the months that you missed in the past. If you want more information, check out learnyourenglish.net/memberships.
We are thrilled to announce our partnership with Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada, for this podcast series on corrective feedback. A big thank you to Dr. Eva Karchava and her MA class to produce this interview series, which we know will be a fantastic analysis of corrective feedback and its role in language learning and teaching.
This series has 8 episodes focusing on aspects of corrective feedback. Corrective feedback is a crucial area of second language acquisition, and there has been a lot of research done recently to shed light on the role it plays in student learning. 7 of the interviews in this series were conducted by students in Dr. Karchava's MA class as means of assessment to do 2 primary things. Number 1, to connect researchers to their audience, and number 2, to have her students have a greater level of understanding and investment in the research they were reading.
That's right, Leo, and we're excited to provide an outlet for this project and to give not only new voices an opportunity to be heard, but to allow for new podcasting experiences for many. If you or your institution is interested in producing a mini-series, either as a means of assessment or otherwise, please reach out to us at info@learnyourenglish.com.
This is episode 5 in our corrective feedback series featuring Dr. María del Pilar Garcia Mayo. Dr. Garcia Mayo is the director of research group Language in Speech, a multidisciplinary group at the University of the Basque Country in Spain. The group focuses on the acquisition of English as a foreign language. Dr. Garcia Mayo has a PhD in linguistics from the University of Iowa and is the director of the MA program Language Acquisition in Multilingual Settings, as well as the head of the Department of English and German Studies at the University of the Basque Country. Her publications span the area of second and third language acquisition of English, morphosyntax, and the study of conversational interaction in EFL. She is also the co-editor of journal Language Teaching Research. Conducting the interview today is Jean Chalbois and Sarah Langridge. With that said, let's get on with the show.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Dr. Pilar Garcia Mayo. We are going to start off with asking you a question about a study that you did with Dr. Mia in 2014 in reference to corrective feedback. So in your study with Dr. Mia in 2014, your results showed that in an English foreign language context, the teacher was using the whole spectrum of corrective feedback types, favoring explicit feedback. And this was shown to be 82% effective as compared to content and language integrated learning environments, or the learning class, where the teacher favored recast more and had an uptake rate of 52%. So we were wondering, why do you think that corrective feedback in English foreign language contexts has been shown to be more effective than corrective feedback in the CLIL context?
Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for inviting me to have this informal conversation. And I will kind of give a long answer to this question because I really want to contextualize it, okay? So I'd like to clarify that this question relates to, as you have said, to a study that I co-authored with my then PhD student, Dr. Ruth Milla, and it was about a comparison between oral corrective feedback in EFL versus Clil context. One of the reasons for that study to be carried out was found in a meta-analysis that Alison Mackey and Gu, one of her students, carried out back in 2007, right, in which they reported a positive relationship between context and the effect of corrective feedback, with significant larger effects in foreign language settings versus second language settings. Also, in Lister and Morris 2006, call for more qualitative type of research to understand potential contextual differences. Well, first of all, we have to be clear about what oral corrective feedback is. And probably, as you know, is kind of a reactive type of for-focus instruction, which is considered to be effective in promoting noticing. And therefore, it has been claimed to foster language learning. Yes. In general, previous studies have reported that recasts were the most frequent type of corrective feedback, but there were differences between foreign language and second language context. In foreign language settings, teachers used more explicit types of feedback and prompts, right? Mm-hmm. And teachers in second language settings had lessons focused on meaning and offered more implicit types of correction. It is on the basis of these differences that Lister and Mori propose their counterbalance hypothesis, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, that hypothesis says that for corrective feedback to be effective, it should differ from the main orientation of the lesson. So if you are in a form-oriented foreign language setting, then recast should be used as they would be more salient, right? Whereas in second language settings, well, more oriented to meaning, prompts would be more effective. Now, in our study, what we compared was the pure, quote unquote, EFL context in Spain, which is 3-4 hours per week of English, right? Mm-hmm. With a Clil, content and language integrated learning context, within the same school. That was very important, okay? So Clil, I don't know if you following me.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Clil is a very popular methodological approach in most countries in Europe. And it can be interpreted as an educational approach where what you do is you teach curriculum content through the medium of a foreign language. I mean, it has been thought of so that you can make up for, or actually not make up, to offer students more exposure to the language without extending their busy schedules, right? So these students in our study, they were high school students. They had 4 lessons, 50-minute lessons of business English. Okay, that was the Clil part. Was business English. So in your study, corrective feedback was more effective in the EFL context in terms of immediate uptake. Now, I should clarify, both Clil and EFL are foreign language contexts, okay? But when we talk about pure EFL, it's just classes in English, on English, right? And when we talk about Clil, we are talking about, in this case, business English, besides their current, their English classes. So it was more effective as far as immediate uptake, which, again, we have to remember that it has been claimed to be indicative of some kind of awareness that could lead to some interlanguage restructuring, right? But why? Well, because the EFL teacher used a wide variety of corrective feedback types, right? What Lister and Ranta already back in 1997 called multiple feedback, right? To address most corrective feedback episodes. Now, this type of combined correction seems to be much, much richer than the recast and elicitation types that the Clil teacher used. Okay, this, of course, was an easy explanation, which, has an easy explanation. That's what we think, right? Because the Clil teacher uses corrective feedback types that try not to interrupt, right, the flow of conversation that the learners have in that business class, right? Whereas the EFL teacher does not mind stopping the conversation and devoting time to the provision of corrective feedback. In fact, in a foreign language class, in a pure foreign language class, teachers here, at least in our context, are expected to do that, and students expect to be corrected, right? Whereas in the business class, the teacher is probably more interested, or was probably more interested in allowing the students to say at least something. I will talk about that a little bit more later on, and not to interrupt them. So that's probably what the difference is, right?
So do you think that the curriculums allow more room for the instructor to provide that kind of feedback, or to make room to provide a variety of the feedback rather than sticking more to the curriculum or sticking to the script, so to speak?
Well, this would lead us to a different topic, but the thing is that the type of training, that's why I want to talk about that later on, if possible, but that's the type of training that people here in Spain have when they are asked by their schools, to teach, business English, or to teach history, or to teach biology, right? Most of these teachers are specialists, especially in high school here, which our data come from a high school. They're specialists in their topic.
We will follow up on the teacher training later on. You're right. We do have more questions regarding that. But to go back to the idea of using different types of feedback in the EFL or the Clil context, do you think that certain contexts allow, or are more allowing for the learners to notice certain things and ultimately change their behavior or change their language later on? Is it more context dependent as well for the learner?
Okay, so what we did in that study that you mentioned in the first question, right? That was a pilot study. In fact, it was from Dr. Milla's MA thesis, right? And so there we reported few significant differences, quantitative differences, right? When we say significant, we're talking about statistically significant differences, right? Between the two contexts. But that was probably due to the small database we had, right? However, interesting qualitative differences were observed already with this small database. Now, in Milla 2017, which is Dr. Milla's PhD dissertation, which I supervised. Part of the study actually has been recently published in just this year. It has been out in a chapter. And so in that dissertation, the database was enlarged. And we also analyzed, again, EFL versus Clil teachers. And we also analyzed another pair of EFL, Clil teachers to discard, the possibility of, teachers' idiosyncrasies that might have affected, the results in the previous study. Now, one of the main findings that we reported in this new study is that the differences in lesson orientation, Clil and EFL, and that influenced the teacher's amount, not just the amount, but also the types of oral corrective feedback provided, and also the learner's behavior. Okay, so we found that corrective feedback episodes in the Clil and EFL settings, they were different in number and in nature, right? In this study also, we found that, as predicted, Clil classrooms in secondary education are oriented to meaning and not to form. Again, I repeat, I'm talking about the Spanish context, right? Yeah. And about your specific question about whether certain contexts affect what will be noticed or learned and ultimately changed by the learner. Obviously, I can only refer to what we found in our study, right? And what we found was this time significant differences between the corrective practices implemented by the two teachers, not only with respect to the proportion of errors corrected. The EFL teacher corrected basically 80% of the errors, and the Clil teacher only 20%. But also in relation to the types of corrective feedback used, right? So the EFL teacher was mostly focused on explicit types, and the Clil teacher on recast, even though both of them used recasts, but the recasts were different, right? Because the Clil teacher used more implicit conversational types of recasts, where the EFL teacher used more didactic and explicit types of recast. Another interesting difference was that the Clil learners, the Clil student, used their L1, their first language, much more than the EFL learners, right? We thought that was interesting, but again, the explanation for that is kind of easy, because if Clil learners miss something, is specific lexical items to express their ideas, right? So that's why they just fell back on their L1. Anyway, I always say that in order to make claims about anything that we do and about whether, something might be changed in the learner's interlanguage, we always need longitudinal studies, right?
Absolutely, that helps.
Yeah.
Later on.
But I don't know about other contexts, but here it's very, very difficult to access schools, because these days you have to obtain permissions from, especially if you work with minors, right? Nowadays that we are working with children, I mean, you need the parents or legal caretakers' permission, the school's permission, the ethics committees, the university ethics committee permission. So when you get to the classroom, you have like 1 year of work before you actually get into the classroom. So it's very difficult. And of course, to convince teachers that, well, we actually need longitudinal studies, that really interrupts their classroom, dynamics, and that's hard, right? But I'll talk about that later as well.
So you just mentioned about explicit and implicit feedback again, and I just want to come back to that and ask about if explicit feedback, in your experience anyway, has led to greater noticing for uptake for a learner.
Okay, I think that's, that's a kind of very, very interesting question. I think that I have to constrain my answer again to the foreign language setting. And based on the data we have collected throughout the years, I would say that, learners need to notice in order for uptake to take place, right, to occur. We need to consider and not to forget that in foreign language settings, learners at all levels have very little contact with the language at school, So teachers should provide them with the best learning opportunities in the time they have allotted for their subjects, be those EFL or the teaching of subjects through the foreign language in Clil context, right? Now, I was, thinking about this issue, and I remember a paper that was, it's kind of old because things are all very quickly these days. And this was in 2004, and it was in an ESL setting, actually in Canada. And this author, Heft, this was an old study, I mean, not old, 2004, right? And actually this person had 3 groups, right? And had a metalinguistic group, metalinguistic plus highlighting, and repetition plus highlighting, right? And the findings indicated that feedback that provides an explanation of the error and also highlights the error in the student input, that is to say, metalinguistic explanation plus highlighting, is the most effective at eliciting learner uptake, right? There is another study which is a bit more recent, 2011, and again also in an ESL setting, which is very different from an EFL setting. And here it was found that it was only recasts with rising intonation that were the most effective for learners noticing. Professor Karchava, actually, you probably know that she and Professor Hussein Nasaji have just published a handbook, right, on corrective feedback, which is going to be kind of the Bible for some years now, because it's just a great handbook. And she noted that research has repeatedly shown that explicit corrective feedback strategies whose corrective intent is overt, right, and not only are preferred by learners, but also bring about opportunities for increased feedback noticing, right? Now, for me, another very important question is how you measure noticing, right? Because there are intervening variables. I mean, just such as learner proficiency, and especially in our case, we are sometimes very interested in specific target features, right? And so that makes a difference, right? And one aspect that I think is very interesting to notice, because I do so much research on interaction, that there's very interesting research by Ana Fernandez Dobao, right, who is at the University of Washington in Seattle. She works with Spanish as a foreign language, right? And what she has reported is that silent in interaction, when you have like small groups of 3, for example, silent learners sometimes just who seem to be observing, right? And you would say, as a teacher, or as a researcher, you think, well, he or she is not getting anything. Well, those learners actually, they were not contributors, so to speak, right, to the interaction. Right. They were shown to be actually consolidating their knowledge as well. So when you bring this idea to the corrective feedback field, sometimes, and this has to do, of course, with the measuring of uptake. Sometimes you just restrict yourself to the actual measurement. Well, sometimes you'll get not the whole picture, because people who apparently are not uptaking, so to speak, they might be restructuring their interlanguage as well, right? Even though they do not show it immediately, right? So
yes, absolutely. This leads me to something that was written in the handbook that Dr. Karcheva and Nasaji are publishing in 2021. And from your paper there, you have a comment that corrective feedback types that provide learners with the opportunity to self-repair appear to be more effective. So with Alcon Soler, in 2008, you found that an increased effect in terms of learner uptake, particularly when learners initiated the corrective feedback episode. So could you expand on that a little bit more as well, and how to get a learner to initiate a corrective feedback episode? How do you do that?
Which paper was that? Is that in the 2021 chapter?
It is, yes. This is in the corrective feedback in a second versus foreign language context paper.
As far as initiating, I mean, you're talking about a real classroom?
Yeah, how do you get learners to initiate a corrective feedback episode?
To initiate it? That's when Well, if they want to, they sometimes correct, they self-correct, or they can correct a partner, right?
Right.
So that's when they initiate it. But
Could it
I mean,
also be asking clarification?
What was that?
Sorry, could it also be asking clarification from the
Of course.
instructor or for feedback?
We have seen that in children a lot. Okay, we have several papers on that with the children. When you're saying, they're very young, they don't have enough lexical repertoire, lexical items or something, they do it. I mean, they use clarification requests, they use comprehension checks, they use all kind
So
of.
I have a question about that, Pilar. So does all of this fall under the umbrella of negotiation of meaning?
Negotiation of meaning, yes. Yeah, and they do that both in pure foreign language context and in Clil context as well, right? But again, what we have found is that there's an age issue there. Even though you're dealing with very young learners, it's not the same 8 to 9, 9 to 10, than when they are 11, 12. Yeah, the last year of primary school in Spain is 11, 12, right? So those are much more shy, right? Than the little ones. The little ones are much more adventurous, so to speak.
I want to add one more question because you were talking about noticing, and I don't know if you have an answer to this question, but just to interrupt here the flow, but are there any sort of mechanisms whereby the user's attention can be directed to features of the input, or mechanisms that the speaker or the learner can use to make noticing more salient?
Well, now you'll have to contextualize that. Is this like in a normal classroom development?
In a regular classroom.
In a regular classroom?
Yeah.
And you're talking about oral corrective feedback, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Not written, right?
Not written. Yes.
Okay. I guess as a teacher, the best way I have to, well, first thing, you have to assume that you're teaching the class totally in English, okay? Which I'll have my doubts about. I mean, I've observed many classes here, very foreign language classes, and I think that's the major problem, okay, in most primary and high school class in Spain. Teachers, especially, well, here, you have two other languages teachers can fall back on. I mean, that's Basque and Spanish. So when they see that students are kind of a bit at a loss, okay, we'll use it. Okay, we have studies on that too. The L1 is fine. I mean, it's not, we don't want to just say don't use the L1, because the L1 actually is a scaffolding, tool, right? And it helps the flowing of the conversation, but you cannot overuse it, right? And so as a teacher, what can I do, right? For me, one of the best techniques is changing in the intonation, right? That's, for me, one of the major tools or weapons, as it were, that the teacher has, right? To call the learner's attention. I mean, again, that's why I like to contextualize, because it's not the same to be teaching primary school students than high school students. High school students, come on, you really have to have a lot of energy. I really admire high school teachers, right? Because their attention span could be 2 minutes, 5 minutes, right? And then they go, they just do other things, right? So you really have to call their attention and combine. Again, I go back to this idea that I mentioned at the beginning: multiple feedback tools. So if I use rising intonation, I can also use the blackboard at the same time and write what I'm saying. So, this type of thing. Some people are more visual, so even if you use rising intonation, they won't get it. Or they might, there's lots of research on recasts, and the teacher is recasting something, I don't know, let's say use of articles in English, right? And the learner might be understanding that, okay, I've used the wrong word, right? Or something like that, instead of getting the article, right? So there are lots of studies with lots of results, depending, again, on so many variables, right? It's very difficult to overgeneralize, right? Or to generalize, because you will be overgeneralizing.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Quality professional development is such an important part of the teaching industry, but it's surprisingly hard to come by. That's why I was so pleased to come across Learn Your English, a company providing online teacher education courses with a fresh perspective. My name is Erin, and I'm an English language teacher. After a decade in the classroom, I found myself teaching the same things in the same way. My learning seemed to have plateaued. I wanted to take charge of my learning, and I really like how the online Learn Your English courses don't prescribe anything. They motivate me to reflect on my teaching and propose tactics and ideas I hadn't considered. If you're a language teacher wanting to learn inside your busy schedule, I highly recommend their online courses on Thinkific. Head on over to lyenetwork.thinkific.com. That's lyenetwork.thinkific.com. Take control of your education. You won't regret it.
Hey guys, I'm Sophia Shanahan from Venezuela, living in Canada, and you're listening to Teacher Talking Time, the Learn Your English podcast.
So in our handbook on corrective feedback, in your chapter, you've identified this research gap. Kind of going back to children, there's a research gap in sort of corrective feedback provision and uptake for children. So, I imagine with like in a foreign language context where there's more and more sort of early start programs, do you see more sort of the research kind of geared towards, children classroom research?
Yeah, I totally do, because if I can share kind of a little bit of my story here. When I arrived in the Basque Country back in 1993, I was a theoretical linguist, right? My dissertation was on parasitic gaps. You know what those are? I had people from biology attending my talks and all that. Well, anyway, I want to explain. You can look that up. What a parasitic gap is. But anyway, it was just theoretical syntax. Okay, so I started teaching PhD courses here, and I realized, again, contextualized back 1993, not many people here had enough background on Chomsky syntax, right? It's not the same these days because we have trained lots of people since then. But thing is that at one point, I went to the library, those times with the car catalog, right? Right? And I found a paper by Professor Teresa Pica, right? Pica, I'll never forget it. Pica, 1996, right? And it was about interaction among adult foreign language learners, second language learners, sorry. And I thought, wow, this is very interesting. In all my studies on theoretical linguistics or anything like, I've never heard about these. And of course, my love is teaching. I love teaching. So I thought, oh, this is very interesting. So I started by myself. I started that line of research in the foreign language context with the help of Professor Pica. It was late Professor Pica. She collaborated with me, from the very beginning. She came and visited visited us back in 1998, right? So it was just a great way to learn from her. So I did lots of research with my PhD students, with adult learners, right? At the same time, I kept my other theoretical syntax line, right, which is very active too. But at one point I thought, what's the point? Okay, what's the point? I mean, you have to start the building from the basis, not from the roof, right? So why don't we? So at that point, right, I applied for a grant from the Spanish Ministry of Economy and Competitiveness, which is kind of the funding agency that we researchers have in Spain. So, because you see, I mean, like the last Eurydice report, I think, was published in 2017 or so. But anyway, probably by now, 90% of the young population in Europe, right, is taking English as a foreign language, of course, except for the UK and other places, right? But it's English as a foreign language. It's overwhelmingly English, right? And so you wonder, what are people doing, about young learners and interaction, and how do they use the language in the classroom? So I applied for that grant. I got a 4-year project, 2012-2016. The title was Oral Interaction Among Young EFL Learners, Negotiation of Meaning and Feedback Strategies in Communicative Tasks and Their Impact on Learning, right? That was the title, a very long one. And so my team and I have collected a large database of children ages 6 to 12. That's the primary school, primary education in Spain. We have published widely on how, in our input-limited foreign language context, right, children are able to negotiate for meaning. They use lots of interactional feedback strategies. I don't know. I guess you know that the pioneering studies with children, but in ESL context, English as second language context, were carried out by Dr. Rhonda Oliver in Australia. Okay, so actually, if you think of a square, you know, and the four parts of the square, ESL and EFL with adults and interaction was covered. ESL with children was covered, but this gap, this niche of EFL for children was not covered at all. There was study here and there, but no real experimental studies. So we have worked a lot with that, and we were very happily surprised to find what we found, and also to share those findings with teachers. Because to our surprise, teachers did not seem to trust their students, you know. And from the very beginning, they said, "Well, let's see what you find," blah blah blah, and you know, we kind of were very happy to share the results with them in informal workshop with teachers, and to share also the type of tasks that we used. The types of tasks that we used were based on the syllabi or the syllabus. The teachers, you know, we had meetings with teachers, and so imagine, I'm thinking now of a study we published, I think it was in System, but it had to do with I'll say it, with detective, with a child detective. That was the main character, right? Because the children were playing with that. I mean, they had readings on that. So we designed, you know, our tasks on the basis of that idea, so that in a way, it was not like the researchers, you know, coming into the classroom and doing things that they were not familiar with. So this takes a lot of work, you know, because you have to get together with the teachers to design the type of tasks and before you actually gather the data, right? Now, after that project, I applied for a new one, of course, which is still, you know, active. And this second one is 2016, mid 21. We'll finish it in June, right? And this one was about collaborative work in the learning of EFL by primary school learners. Okay, the second one is again funded by the Spanish Ministry of Economy and Competitiveness, and it is comprised of 4 studies. And one of those studies is focused on corrective feedback, but in writing. Okay, so we use models and we use reformulations, right? But not just pure writing, it's collaborative writing. So what we do is we video record the children, you know, interacting while they put together a text, right? Which obviously then is given to the teacher or the researcher. And so we have all this information, not just the oral information, but the information about their written product. And we analyze all that, and we analyze the impact of their language related episodes on the written pieces. So we have at least now three PhD dissertations on that topic that are underway. And so we are kind of very happy with what we started, right? Because we actually started working with children back in the mid-90s, but at that time it was about the age factor. Okay, we have lots of research on the age issue as well, because in Spain we were lucky to find people who were first exposed to the language the way I was first exposed to French. At the time it was I was 11, right? So in my generation we were first exposed to a foreign language when we were 11, 12. Then the law changed and you had people exposed to the language when they were 8. And nowadays they're exposed to the language when they're 4. Right. So we got, you know, different cohorts, and the major issue was that they had been exposed to the language, the foreign language, just in a classroom context and for about the same amount of hours. So what is going on there? So that had to do with a different topic, totally different topic. That was the age issue, right? Anyway, that's all I have to say, I guess, about that.
No, it's interesting. Ever since, you know, reading your article and, you know, going and reading articles since, I've noticed that there are just so many, all the participants are, you know, university students, and there is definitely this lack of investigating, you know, children. EFL learners.
Yeah, that's what we are doing now. These days, that's what we are doing.
I was gonna just jump in just quickly, if you don't mind, Jean. Pilar, do you follow the children as they aged in studies? So the same group of students when they're 4, 6, 8, 10, or is that not allowed to be done?
We have never been allowed to do that, which obviously will be that'll be awesome. Now, what we the thing is that I have now a PhD student who is actually she'll be going to Canada for her 3-month stay in October, but what we have managed to do in this PhD dissertation is that she has a first cycle of corrective feedback with models at some point in time, let's say at the beginning of the academic year. Then she has 3 groups, one that doesn't get the corrective feedback, one that gets models, and one that gets models plus some metalinguistic lessons, so to speak. And then after 2 months, the school allow her, after many negotiations, as you can imagine, to gather data from the very same children. Okay. So that'll be great. It has never been done. So that's the novelty of the study, at least in our foreign language context and foreign language context in general. So she has quite a large database, lots of data, right? So she used, with a group, she used models, and with the other models and input enhancement, right?
Right.
Because I mentioned that earlier. There are 2 of our obsessions, have to do with morphosyntactic issues, like, for example, the S of the third person singular, which most Spanish learners of English miss, and which is kind of, you'll go like, huh? Is it that difficult? I mean, in Spanish, you have 6 different endings, 1 per person. In nowadays English, you only have 1 for the present, and you miss it. I mean, and that's one of our hobby horses, I guess. And the other is the he's, her. Okay, the possessive he's, her, and both of those topics I have previous former PhD dissertations on that. I mean, PhD students who have written their dissertations on that. So, for example, the intuition we had for the he's, her is that, well, intuition, and then obviously, if you're a linguist, you check this with your children. And so, I don't know. One day I was talking to my daughter, who's now 21, of course, no child anymore, but no longer a child. But at that point, we were speaking English and blah, blah. And she said, well, because Sarah, his brother. And I said, huh? His brother? There you have, corrective feedback. His brother? I said, oh, I'm sorry. I said, well, why did you say that? And well, you have to know that in Spain, everyone is really metalinguistic aware. If you're not by nature, they make you so because of the type of classes you have. Everyone knows what's a noun and adjective, and you have all the jargon, right? Which was something that was shocking to me when I taught Spanish in the US. Speaking about direct object, people were like looking at me like, what? Anyway, but going back to this anecdote, I asked my daughter, why did you say his brother? You're talking about Sarah. And she said, well, Mom, brother is masculine, right? Oh, okay. So what they're doing is they are establishing agreement, with the noun with the gender of the noun in Spanish. So starting from that, which is just an intuition, this student of mine gathered data, but like with 7 different tasks, right? Online, offline, and obviously we had Basque Spanish learners of English and just Spanish learners of English, because Basque was playing a role as well there, right? But basically, I mean, after 600 pages of a dissertation, the answer was that exactly, right? I mean, it was like they're establishing agreement with the gender of the Spanish now, right?
Okay,
so
that makes sense. Yeah. And when you use your own children, you don't need parental permission, right?
No, mine were guinea pigs when they were very little. Then they didn't play the game anymore. And but sometimes you find out, at some point I have an article published on, let's say, the acquisition of deverbal nouns in English. And so one day my child, he was 8, right? And he was they were learning Basque as well. Neither my husband nor I know Basque because we are not from here. So the guy said, my son said, well, Mom, you know something? English and Basque work in the same way. If you want to say firefighter. And I was like, huh? I was like, what is he saying? and then, in his words, he explained to me, well, in Spanish, or in Basque and English, if you want to say firefighter, you have fire, the noun, and then the verb, right? The same in Basque, right? In Spanish, the word for firefighter is bombero, right? But if you want to say apagafuego, right, it's exactly the reverse order. It's the verb and then the object. So at some point, as I explained to my syntax students, at some point in his mind, right, he said, here I have 3 languages playing up there, and they are, 2 of them are similar, and one is the odd one out, right? In this case, Spanish was the odd one out, right? So I thought, oh, how interesting. I'm going to write so I collected data, with high school students. I think it was high school students at that point. And I wanted to know, and because the underlying hypothesis there would be that the Basque will help them when they were learning English, right? They work in the same. Well, no, it was Spanish. Spanish was a stronger language, right? So these things, that's why research is so exciting, because you never know what's going to happen, right? Sometimes you find the opposite of what you were expecting.
Very true. Yeah. All right. Jean, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's great.
That's right. I'll go off topic.
So in, actually, you mentioned Professor Pica, and there's a paper you did with Professor Pica, and you identified that like peer-to-peer in an FL context, interaction yielded similar uptake than, sort of language learner to native speaker interactions. And I think that's so cool. But in light of that, why do you believe that, maybe I'm using foreign languages maybe too broadly, but in a lot of foreign language contexts, we see a lot of hiring of native speakers, mainly on the value of them being native speakers. So I guess why do you think that trend is still around?
What can I tell you? This is I live this every day, And again, when my this again, I've given you lots of anecdotes, but I think they kind of give you a feeling of what society in general thinks, here and in other countries as well. So when my son played football for many years, well, soccer over there, I guess. And, you had to share lots of hours, on the weekend with other parents. And so one of them once told me, well, when your children grow up, you'll send them to learn English overseas, right? And I said, well, I don't know, perhaps to be like a month with a family or something. Well, you'll send them to the UK, right? And I said, well, no, I'll send them to the USA, right? Or to Canada. Oh my God, but there they don't speak English well. The only good English is the one in the UK. And I said, well, I thought to myself, what a wonderful, what I thought to myself was, am I going to tell her about social linguistics here? And about, so most people in Spain, I would say, they believe that if a native speaker teaches the language class, their kids will learn English basically better and automatically, This is what the literature has referred to as the native speaker myth. By the way, if you have time, you can Google David Crystal. He has a very interesting talk in November 2020. And he says, people think that everything should be modeled as native speaker accent, native speaker grammar. That's out of the window for me, he says, right? Received pronunciation spoken only by 2% of people in England. In England, not Scotland or Wales. Yeah. And so he says, you need to introduce students to all kinds of accents. Otherwise, they will be living in a fool's paradise. I think that's just great, So my idea, and of course, this is my personal opinion, right? I think that having a well-trained non-native speaker that can provide frequent and high-quality input has actually many more advantages than having a native speaker that does not have a command of the native language. Most of the times, that's the case, okay? The native speaker comes here, he or she is hired at a language academy. They don't even speak Spanish, right? Okay, that could have that could have the advantage that you force the learners to use whatever English they have, right? Because this person doesn't know any Spanish or pretends he doesn't know any Spanish. But a non-native speaker has the knowledge of the learner's L1, right? And because it's normally his or hers, right? So you're able to anticipate the problems that your students have because you have been there before, right? And so you can actually, you can play, quote unquote, with the two languages. You can make learners aware of the differences, the similarities between the two systems in such a way that you can facilitate the learning, right? Also, I think you can be kind of a model for your students. They can think, oh, she has done it. I can do it too, right? So, for me, I think there are very interesting books actually about the native speaker myth. Of course, I have nothing against a native speaker for conversation classes, or even if he, sometimes if they do have the training as far as, linguistic tools that they can use, but that's not normally the case. By the way, from information I have from a former PhD student of mine who speaks Chinese, I've been told that that's what happens nowadays in Spain with the learning of Chinese, right? Because the Chinese government sometimes sends here very young people who just speak Chinese, but they don't have the methodological tools to teach Chinese to people who are not used to the Chinese culture. Which is totally different from this one, right? So actually his dissertation was about that. He had, I'm really doing publicity here of my PhD students, but he has just defended his dissertation in November, right? And this guy is, he's an engineer, but he just loved Chinese, right? So he learned, he was self-taught, and then he went to China. He got his MA there, MA on teaching Chinese as a foreign language. And so his dissertation was about comparing traditional Chinese teaching to Chinese teaching by means of drama-based classes, right? It was great, so people here did much better in their oral production as far as accent, intelligibility, fluency, much better with the drama-based versus the traditional Chinese classes, which is for them were just boring, So, but that's what the native speakers of Chinese that come here do, right? So there you have an example of, having a native speaker doesn't mean anything. I mean, of course, it's good for some things, but it's not a panacea, right?
Mm-hmm. Is there anything being currently done to combat this native speaker myth in Spain? Or is it changing? Do you notice that there has been a change towards, especially now, I think with social justice, there has been a lot of conversations. We actually recently we had a conversation with a scholar, Suleiman Jenkins, who is an American who lives in Dubai and who actually encountered a lot of discrimination for not looking like a native speaker, even though he is a native speaker of the language.
Very interesting.
Is there anything happening?
I, as far as I can tell, I don't have, data, but my feeling is that nothing is changing in that sense. Nothing is changing. It's like the native speaker is actually considered like the authority, right? So I don't know. I guess we will have to do something, right? There are books, but again, back to the same story. Who reads the books and who reads the articles and who, if you relate all this to what we are trying to do here at the level of the Basque Country, is, you have to make teachers aware of how important corrective feedback is. I mean, normally, and again, I always say this, in teacher workshops and everything, I never blame teachers, because at least in Spain, they're up to here with administrative work. They don't have time to read research articles or to interpret research articles. So it's our job as researchers to, organize workshops and organize fora in which we can share our findings, leaving aside all the jargon and just conveying the main ideas of what we do, right? And how beneficial they can be for their everyday work.
Yeah, and I think it kind of harkens back to, kind of what we're doing here with, like posting these interviews, but even like, having that corrective feedback Bible.
Mm-hmm.
But which actually kind of leads to the next question of teacher training about corrective feedback. In your paper, you kind of advocate that we need more.
Yeah.
And what does that look like for you?
Okay. I think you said that at the beginning. I've been the coordinator of the MA program, Language Acquisition and Multilingual Settings, since its inception, right? Since 2009. We have people from all over the world actually here, which is kind of amazing because we're based in Vitoria. It's not Madrid or Barcelona, right? It's Vitoria. But we have people from everywhere in the world, right? So I have the chance to teach, and to deal with both students who have just graduated, right? And also with teachers, practicing teachers. Some of them they take like 1 year off to do the master's degree, and some have lots of years of experience, right? And I have to admit that at first I was really shocked at how little these teachers with experience, how little they knew about basic constructs of second language acquisition, right? I remember once talking about, like the unit on, input and blah, blah, and crashes, affective filter and all this stuff. And so they were like looking at me like, that's why, as if they were thinking, that's why this happens. So I realized, well, really, these people have not had the chance to read, different stories that have been there in the second language acquisition field for many years now, right? So I've always defended that teacher training for future language teachers should be a must, right? In their studies, it's not just the training in an MA program, but throughout their career, they should be allowed to take seminars and to update information and all that. There is a very, very interesting study that I sometimes use in my classes, by Alison Mackey and other colleagues. It dates back to 2004, and it's about corrective feedback. And I thought it was very interesting and actually easy to implement, because they are comparing like novel teachers with more experienced teachers, and it's about corrective feedback, right? And they give them a script with the very same lesson. They give them 24 hours to prepare for that lesson, right? And then obviously they record how each of the teachers behave. And you see the very same, corrective feedback episodes and how the experienced teachers deal with it and how the novel teachers, the more or less experienced teachers deal with it. And it's just amazing, And actually, I just remember now that the more experienced teachers, they use, a wider range of tools, right, for corrective feedback. So visual, oral, again, rising intonation, even gestures. You can use, gestures or something like that to call your learner's attention, right? Now, Dr. Milla and myself just published a study, another chapter, because in her dissertation, she also gathered data on teachers' beliefs about corrective feedback and students' beliefs, right? So what we observed was that Clil teachers' beliefs and practices did not really match. Okay, their lessons were not balanced in terms of content and language. And teachers' reflections of their own practices and beliefs, as well as the convergence between beliefs and practices, are hypothesized to help learners language teaching, right? So I think they have to go back to your question. Teachers have to be made aware of their own practices and be provided with further training on the importance of oral corrective feedback, also written corrective feedback. For example, teacher training courses for Clil teachers could include actual video footage of what they do, right? In their classes, right? Of course, this again, leads us to permissions, blah blah, and parents' permission, because the learners will be recorded as well. But going back to my own experience as a teacher, my studies here in Spain were what were in the old times they were called English philology. Nowadays they're called English studies, right? So we had all kinds of literature, English language 1, 2, 3, 4, the nth English language, and then Old English, Middle English. My professors in the US were just, what? And, whole 9-month courses on Old English, translation of Beowulf. I mean, everything, right? And so I knew a lot about the history of the English language. I was really, a philologist, all right. But anyway, I had never taught. I had never been in front of an audience, right? Teaching in front of a class. Because in my times, you either taught or worked. I mean, so would you were a student or you worked, right? So it was no combination of both things. Anyway, so the first time I was in front of a classroom was in the Spanish department, because I was, I went to the States with a Fulbright scholarship, but then I said, well, I need to teach, right? I want to feel the danger, right? Anyway, so they really liked me in the Spanish department because I was not just a native speaker of the language, but I also had the training, the linguistic training and all that. Well, the first time I was in front of my students was like 25. I didn't see 25 people. I just saw 50 eyes, looking at me. But I was very nervous and said, how could this be? This is my language. Anyway, but going back to the teacher training thing, that was the first time. And I thought that was great, So in just one semester, it was not semester 6 months, it was like 4 months period, right? Fall semester, for example. You had two unannounced visits by your supervisor, right? And we should be like sitting back there taking notes, right? You had no idea what she was writing about. And then one more, that one was announced. Someone from the video section of the university, he would come and record, right? Video record your class, right? That's the only way, right? You can learn of what you actually do in the classroom. Like in my case, speaking Spanish, I'll be saying like 1,000 times, ¿entendido? ¿De verdad que lo habéis entendido? I mean, are you sure you have understood it? I was like, gosh. And I was not even, aware of that until I saw myself in the video, it's like, gosh, te estás pasando. I mean, you're overdoing it, right? You're overdoing it. Just stop it, But I was really, I really wanted to make sure that they got the point, right? So also teachers could be shown how to draw their learners' attention to formal aspects of the language by means of, again, implicit oral corrective feedback moves. Clil and EFL teachers should try to assess what their learners' beliefs about oral corrective feedback are, right? They should try to make them aware of the benefits of this pedagogical tool, even explain what the major types a teacher could use are, and perhaps ask them questions about their favorite types. Who knows? Because that will link to the learner's motivation as well. Well, I like this one better. So you do it like with that student, you'll use this type of feedback. So I think that attention to language forming in content lessons, which is what is actually missing, has been found to be essential for adequate language development, right? And learners should also be made aware of, as I was saying, of the important benefits of corrective feedback, right? And again, Alison Mackey with other colleagues, she has been pioneer in so many things. They employed, this was a much more recent study in 2016. There's a book on peer interaction, right? And they employed a 4-part metacognitive instruction session, right? With a group of low intermediate EFL learners. So they were not advanced, they were just low intermediate EFL learners in Japan, about the importance of corrective feedback, to show them ways to provide feedback in interaction with peers, right? And they presented the benefits of meaning-based instruction and of interactions, provided learners with useful conversational moves, and they could use negotiation of meaning strategies. I did that too with one of my PhD students, but for her MA thesis. And so we had two groups. In one group, they could see a video in which they could see people negotiating, right? And the other group didn't see that video. And so then they had their task, right? And there was a clear difference, right, between the ones. I mean, you have to show people how to do things. You have to give them the tools to do that, right? Anyway, so of course, I think that training is crucial, but not just training teachers, but also making both teachers and learners aware of these things, right?
Cool. Thank you so much. That is all of our questions. Yeah, so thank you for meeting with us. Or unless I'm missing a question.
Thank you very much.
I've probably talked a lot, but I really want to thank you. I want to thank Eva. I want to thank you all for bearing with me, for inviting me. And it has really been a pleasure to share my thoughts here, mainly based on what we have done here throughout the years. And again, if you're interested in what we do, you can always find information in my webpage, and most publications. I mean, the list of the publications is there, and anyone listening to this podcast can contact me, and I'll be very happy to share our research. I know, it's really very difficult to summarize all the details in a podcast, but I'm very happy that I've been allowed to do so. Oh, they can send me an email.
Where can people contact you,
they can see my webpage, which is www.laslab.org-pilar, right? That's my webpage. If you Google my name, that'll be probably the first thing that will pop up. And they can send me an email message, just my name, all in small letters, María Pilar Garcia Mayo at ehu.eus.
I was just going to say, you just made all of that research accessible to a lot of people who will never have time to actually read that.
Yeah. That's how we go.
Yeah. And we're definitely going to have you back on the podcast to talk about different things this time.
I'll be happy to do so. We have worked a lot throughout. I've been here for almost 28 years.
Wow.
And when I arrived here, there was nothing, literally nothing about second language acquisition. And now, as you can see in my webpage, we have a pretty big group, lots of PhD students, again, for Victoria standards, and actually for many places in Spain standards. And we have been considered or labeled an excellence research group by the Basque government. I mean, which is actually our major funding agency, right? By the way, we organize international seminars every year. Last year, we had to cancel our seminar because of the COVID thing. But that seminar that was going to be face-to-face is going to be virtual now. You will find information on our webpage on it. It will take place on May 28th, and it's going to be about children and form-focused tasks. And we will have the pleasure to have Laura Gursinski-Weiss from Indiana, Masatoshi Sato, Yuko Butler, Natsuko Shintani, and I forgot her first name, Kasprovic, the young researcher in the UK. Yes, so it's going to be online, and it's going to be basically for free. Lots of people can register. So yeah, and again, we have international seminars, at least one every year. Most VIPs from second language acquisition have been here, even either as in those workshops or in our master's program teaching modules. Now in May we will have Vicky Murphy from Oxford, and every year we have lots of people coming in, visiting us.
Wow, busy time. It sounds great. We'll link all of that in the show notes and on the blog for the episode, and hopefully people can join.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Teacher Talking Time, brought to you by Learn Your English. Ready to take control of your education? You're in the right place. Teaching, professional development, learning. Expand your world with Learn Your English.